Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on She'emet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler. Hey, Barry. Solomon Shechter, Long Island. Starting up this week, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky on Shechesed. Hey, Jeremy. Well, starting up this week also. Well,
if I make it. That's a big if at this point.
I hope so. We are really coming to the end of the whole Torah. We're with Parshat Nitzavim, a fantastic, amazing Parsha. Just before we get into the Parsha, I think we ought to talk a little bit about, the division of the Torah into Parshiot, because, it doesn't seem fair. Nitzavim gets like it takes maybe 10 minutes to read the Parsha. Kitavo, it took us like a half an hour. Kiteitzei also. Not to mention, Naso, which is like the better part of an hour, and we're going to be reading Parshiot, in the fall. They go on. So what is going on? What is up with this and the Parshas? Can you give us some rumination on Parshaology, the division of the Torah into Parshas? Barry?
So I think the one message is that as we come to the end of the Torah, we recognize that we're not so eager to let it go. And therefore, at the very end, we go practically chapter by chapter. We have 5 chapters left after Kitavo, and it's 4 Parshiot. And we're going to go week by week, and we also have the extension because we don't get to V'zot Bracha until Simchat Torah, which is, at least a week after the last Parsha, because it's the ninth day of Sukkot. And I think it's a recognition that even though we're looking forward to a new year, we're not so eager to let the old year go because part of us goes with it.
It's like you're counting down, you say to your kids, okay, 10, 9, 8, 3, 2.5, 2.25. 2, 1.8, 1.7.
Exactly.
Well, I concur with your meaning, but I just want to, sometimes I have the experience when I'm really enjoying a book, really enjoying a book, I just don't want to end it, right? So I kind of take my time at the end of the book, just kind of, lingering on each page. And that's kind of what you're talking about here. There's an emotional attachment. We don't want to let it go, but we do let it go.
Right. But the other thing you do with the book that you like is to start it over right away.
Well, okay. So that's what we do. So therefore, one could also argue that those who ordained the division of the Torah into Parshas actually had some insight into the calendar and matched up some themes of these chapters with the Parsha. After all, look, here we are. We're several days, just short of a week from Rosh Hashanah, and we are, what would have been if we would have been discussing things from last week, like the captive woman and the rebellious child, or other key themes. In this Parsha, Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem, you are standing here. Those of us who experience the high holidays experience them as a mass group event. This is a communal event, a congregational event. In fact, I think we could argue that it's an echo of the covenantal event, Zichron Truah.
This is really important. I think that there is in addition to these, experiential or phenomenological descriptions of how it feels to conclude the Torah in these Parshiot, I think there's an additional thing going on which is close to Pshat, which is that that the Torah has a number of endings. There's a number of major speeches at the end, which are maybe a little bit, in a certain sense, a little bit superfluous or repetitive, but they all each get their due in the way we read it. So Kitavo has a major conclusion to the Torah. It begins with that peoplehood ritual of the first fruits, and then Moshe, and we have the blessings and curses on Har Gerizim and Har Ebal, and Moshe stands up and says, There's going to be blessing for this, but I want you to know that the consequences for disloyalty are terrible. And you have the last thing I want to tell you is this major set of curses. And that's how Kitavo addresses the end of the Torah. And then you have Nitzavim, which comes along and says, in a very different vein, this week's parasha says, we are all here. We are committing to this covenant. Everybody in the people, in the past, in the future, the wealthy and the powerful and the not so powerful and the women and the men. And that's a very affirmative. Then you get Hazinu, which is another big downer. Hazinu is another Moshe yelling at the people. And then you get V'zot HaBracha, which is another blessing of the people. So it seems to me that at some level, the Torah itself, combining different kinds of documents, has like multiple endings. And our way of dividing the Parshiot, I don't say that it's for that, but one of the things that it has the effect of is giving each one of those things a bit of a foregrounding, which I find moving.
So I think we can have our cake and eat it too here. I think both of these branches of interpretation, that is the not wanting to part with the Torah, but of course understanding that we're going to start it again, and also the thematic confluence of these ending parsha with the idea that it's a conscious idea. We're ending another year of our lives. This is the genius of Judaism, to play out the story of our lives on an annual basis, with the parallel to the story of the Torah. We're living the Torah every year. I mean, we're not at V'zot HaBracha, but it's sad. It's not only sad because Moses dies. It's sad because we're marking another moment in time. We're connecting to the eternity of the people through the recommencing of the Torah. So let's take
one last thing about the ending. There's we Ashkenazim don't say it nearly as much, but there's a poem called Achot Kitana, a Sephardic poem. It's at least a little bit quoted in the Lev Shalem. We use it at our synagogue also. The poem's from the 13th century in Spain, and Israel is the metaphor. Israel is the little sister. She's battered. She's mistreated. She's suffering, and each of the stanzas of the poem ends with Tichle Shana v'Kilaloteha. Let this accursed year end. Let this year end with all its curses. And then the last stanza is, we're going to return to Tzion. We're going to rebuild the Solu. We're going to clear out the paths of Tzion. And the last stanza ends, Tachel Shana u'virchoteha. Let the new year begin with all of its blessings. So it's this great Rosh Hashanah poem. And the line of Tichle Shana v'Kilaloteha, let the year end with all of its curses, it's really quite appropriate, last year and this year, is a citation from the Talmud, in which it says, why do we read Ki Tavo just before Rosh Hashanah? We read Ki Tavo, we read the Tochecha, we read all of that rebuke just before Rosh Hashanah to just put an end to that last year with all of its suffering. And just put it in the rearview mirror and look forward to a different and blessed year. So I really like the way Ki Tavo comes just at this turn of the year. Nitzavim with its vastly more positive outlook about how everybody, it's not up in heaven. We can do this. I really like how it fits just before Rosh Hashanah each year. It seems to me that it is a kind of a merging of form and function, that we get to say goodbye to all of that disappointment, suffering, and hello to what's before us.
So I want to cast it in the optimistic note in a different direction. That the first verse, Atem nisavim hayom kolchem lefnei Adonai Elohechem rashechem v'shiftechem ziknechem v'shodrechem kol ish Yisrael, and then it goes on that this is a vision of the community on Rosh Hashanah. Everyone is assembled before God. And the verse continues, Tabchem v'nishechem v'gercha asher b'karav machanecha b'chotev eitzacha ad shoev meimacha. Everyone is here, from the highest to the lowest. And in a sense, that's what we used to see pre-COVID on Rosh Hashanah. It's the day when all Jews, figuratively speaking, of course, come to the synagogue to stand before God. And it's a day when we really can ask ourselves, who are we? Meaning, who is our community? And it includes everyone, even those Jews who only come proverbially 3 times a year, but also the important people and even the people that are on the fringes of the Jewish community, the Gercha Asher B'Sharecha. And I think that it's a way for us to conceptualize how we want to begin the new year, not just the ending of the old year, which is very important too, but what we have to establish the basis for the new year.
But you had a nice little homily on the word kulchem. You heard that, I know.
So I heard from Rabbi Jason Vitters, who spoke at my synagogue last night, that kulchem, which we translated as all of you, meaning that all the people are there. But what he suggested is all of you means you bring all of yourself. That what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur demand of us is a totality of our being. Yeah. And it's a way that we can reorient ourselves, because let's face it, most of the year we are fragmented and we rarely focus ourselves as we should. And on Rosh Hashanah, we can begin again.
But these people are a snapshot. And I'd like you to focus on that lovely verse 14, Ki et asher yeshno po imano omer hayom, those who are here with us today, lifnei Adonai Eloheinu, before God, vet asher einenu po imano hayom. This is such a rich verse. You know, it's saying, look, I'm not making the covenant with only the people that are standing here. That is to say, the historical dimension of this act will affect all history. I don't know if if you relate to that in the same sense. As powerful. What are your takes on that?
Well, who are the people that are not here? There are only two possibilities. They're the people that came before us, and in the context of Sefer Dorim, they're the ancestors that died in the wilderness. The parents of the people and grandparents of the people who are going to enter the land, if Moses ever stops talking. Or it could be the people who are ahead. And as you suggest, sometimes, especially in America, we think of ourselves as rugged individualists, as if we could stand alone. But the Torah here is reminding us that the past creates obligations for us that we can't avoid or evade, that we are part of a continuum. And when we step into the future, we have to bring the past with us.
That is just beautifully well said. It's exactly right. I'm going to take a stab and guess that the pshat means that what this might have meant to its original audience is that this is a covenant with our ancestors as well as those present now, the people in the past, whether it's the failed generation of the Midbar, of the desert, or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. But rabbinic midrash, and this does speak to me and quite close to the way it speaks to you, Bar, is that it is forward-looking. There's a wonderful midrash that gives the source, and I'm sure many of our listeners have heard it, that this refers to the souls of people who would yet convert. Like everyone was at Sinai, and even people who would not be born in Jewish families but choose to join the Jewish people, they too are present at this covenant renewal moment, which is quite stirring. I do think that Barry put his finger really on such an interesting and important point for contemporary American Jews, which is like we really are individualists, even if we're not individualists in the way we live, even if we care about community, we really do prize human freedom and human choice making, and it doesn't really go down all that easy to say that you are like, things in the past have a normative influence, have a normative decisive impact on how you live your life. But like, how can the people of the past have an effect on me? I'm a free agent. I can do what I think is best, and I can live the life that I choose for myself. And of course, I like those ideas too. But exactly as you said, I think the claim here is that you have inherited something precious, and that it has a very, very significant spiritual, ethical, normative gravity on your life, and you have to respond to it.
And yet, the Parsha speaks at the end to the whole notion of choice. I don't want to jump to it right now. We'll leave it hanging for a moment. But choice is so central to the whole underpinning ideas of the book of Deuteronomy. You have your choice here. You have your choice with everything.
Yeah, but Plato, in pre-modern times, especially like in ancient philosophy, in Plato, for example, Plato says that people only make bad choices because they are like possessed by a demon. Like, why would you choose the bad? Why would you choose the unethical? Why would you choose something destructive unless you were kind of out of your mind? And the Gemara says this Platonic idea in a different idiom. It says, Ein adam over avera ela shenichnesa bo ruach shtut. A person doesn't sin unless they have been possessed by some sort of madness. Like, it is, I think the choice here doesn't mean, or might not mean, I choose among the options and I take the one that I think is best. It's like I have the strength to choose the good.
Indeed. Okay. So here we go. We got a number of very important verses here. Hanistarot ladonai Eloheinu. The hidden things belong to God. Vaniglot. Now the text says lanu ulvanenu. Okay. I'm going to turn to you, Jeremy, on this verse. This verse is talking about concealed matters, sins, concealed transgressions, and public transgressions. But how do we interpret this?
So this line, very well-known line, comes at the end of a kind of a threat. Some of you will betray this covenant, betray this brit that we're making, and there's going to be terrible punishment, and it's going to look like Stom Ba'amorah. It's going to be a devastation, and people are going to walk by and say, "What in the world happened?" And so the people here, they worshipped foreign gods, and they were, punished, and God uprooted them and sent them into exile, and that's the divine wrath, and the sort of coda to that passage of curse or threat is Hanistarot ladonai Eloheinu v'haniglot lanu ulevanenu ad olam. I'll read it as it appears in the Torah without modifying it, and then I'll modify it. The hidden things belong to the Lord our God, and the revealed things belong to us and our children forevermore, so that we may do all the words, so we may fulfill all the words of this Torah. So it would seem to be like an interjection, just shot, not amending anything. It would seem to be a bit of an interjection. There's going to be terrible, terrible punishment if you betray. And the people seem to respond something like, let hidden sins be the province of God, but we will take care of all the revealed things. We will take care of the things that happen in public life. Lord, please have mercy on us for the nistarot, the hidden things, which how can I possibly be responsible for the secret things that my neighbor doesn't even know about them? And that's what secret means. And so I think that there is a claim, and this claim is found in the Midrash as well, but there's a bit of an anxiety about this really strong sense of corporate responsibility. We as Am Yisrael, we as the Jewish people, are responsible for keeping each other on the straight and narrow. We're responsible for rebuking each other if we sin. But how about the stuff we don't know about? Please, God, have mercy on us for the stuff we don't know about, and we will do our best with the stuff that we do know about. Okay, that I think is probably the semantic meaning of the text that we have as it appears. But in ancient texts, the style of marking, that something had to be removed was not, track changes with a line through it or some red pencil. It was to put a dot on top of a word or a letter said that this word doesn't belong. So there are dots on top of the letters lanu ulevanenu and the first ayin of ad olam. And if you read that straight up, and you take out the words for us and our children, then the verse reads, the hidden things belong to the Lord our God, and the revealed things, so that we may do all of the words of this Torah, we may fulfill all the words of the Torah. So then it means something like, oh God, we're in your hands, the hidden things, the revealed things, we want to do our best. But there's yet a third way to go. The number of dots is a little confusing. So the dots over lanu ulevanenu and the next letter ayin of ad olam, you can't take away the ayin, then it makes no sense at all. So that gives us 3, 6, 10, 11 dots. Well, there's a theory. I actually don't know where this theory comes from, so someone will enlighten me. The 11 letters that might be dotted would be Ladunai Eloheinu. That would give us 11, but that the scribes who wanted to make an emendation, it was impious to suggest that you were taking out the words Ladunai Eloheinu, for the Lord our God. So they dotted the wrong letters, but they did so in a way to let you know that 11 was the real number. And the Hamevin Yavin, the wise can figure it out. And then the words that are really being removed are for the Lord our God. And then the verse should read like this: Hanistarot v'haniglot lanu ulevanenu. The hidden things and the revealed things are our responsibility, adolam, forever and ever, lasot et kol divrei Torah zot, so we may fulfill this whole Torah. And then the claim is, after this threat, that if the people betray the covenant, there's going to be terrible divine punishment. Then Am Yisrael responds and says, we're in it to win it. We're responsible for the whole thing. The hidden things, the revealed things, we are going to be loyal to the covenant.
I'm gonna go with Jeremy here. I think that there is a very compelling case to be made poetically for the word pairs hanistarot v'haniglot without the interruption of God's name, and lanu ulvanenu. So there's some deliberate poetics going on here, and of course we can go on, but I think you've given us a very compelling a reading, and also I think it heightens the idea of personal responsibility or collective responsibility, that now we have this covenant, it's ours. And then of course you get that same theme repeated in the verses at the end, or in the middle of verse 11. This mitzvah is not far from you. Lo v'shamayim, it's not in heaven, and it's not beyond the horizons. Lo me'avar hayam, it is karov elecha davar ma'od. It's here with you. It's in your mouth and it's your heart to do it. In other words, this doesn't belong to masters. This doesn't belong to savants. This doesn't belong to miracle workers. This belongs to you, and you have responsibility for it. And it's accessible to you. And I know Jeremy has some thoughts on it, but Barry, the whole idea of your accessibility or relationship to the Torah here and what is being stated.
So one of the things that we like to do is to read verses in isolation. And so if we just take the verse itself, Hanistarot Ladonai, we could read it as a kind of polemic against Jewish mysticism, in a sense that secret knowledge belongs to God. That's not your avenue of inquiry. You need to concern yourself with haniglot, things that have been revealed to you. And the way I would connect it with lo b'shamayim, that it's not in heaven, is that our locus of life is here on earth. We're not supposed to be chasing after God in heaven. And one of the things to keep in mind is that in Devarim, God is exclusively in heaven. Unlike other books in the Torah, he does not walk on the earth. He doesn't appear here in any dramatic fashion as he has in earlier books of the Torah, because our life is here on earth. God has his abode. He looks down upon us, as we mentioned last week, I think it was, Ashkipa Mima'on Beitacha. And we need to take up the mantle of life on this earth and do what God wants us to do down here, and let God worry about what happens up in heaven.
Okay, and so that takes us to the coda of this parsha. And Jeremy, when you were talking before about so many endings of the book, I was thinking like a Beethoven symphony, which is just bam bam bam. There's so many endings to the symphony, and finally the release of all the dramatic tension happens at the end. After so many repeated chords, etc. And so here we have a coda at the end of this parsha, which I think could function as one of the ends. And it's a long passage, but it starts with I give you life and goodness, death and evil. And we want you to, as we move on, I bear witness, let heaven and earth bear witness to you. Hachayim v'amavet natati lefanecha. Life and death I have given to you. Habracha v'kala. Blessing and curse. Uvacharta v'chayim. Choose life, leman tichya, so that you will live, you and your seed after you, to love the Lord your God, to listen to his voice, to cling to him, because he is your life, the length of your days, Lashevet al Adama, to dwell on the earth or dwell in the land that God has given to you. And that is the coda. And the Torah probably could have ended right there with that ultimate statement. And we've talked about it many times, V'charta v'chayim, choosing life. And so this, functions really as I would say, the central theme. I mean, we used to say this all the time at camp, be holy, be blessing, be holy, choose life. It's one of the great lines, the great lines,
Flashing symbols, it's brilliant. I totally agree. I think that not only I think this could be the end, I kind of think it is an end. And in the collection of ancient Jewish voices, I think that V'zora Bracha and Hazinu and this and the Tochicha were all probably intended at some level as an end. And whether it's Moshe Rabbeinu himself, who just couldn't quite stop, even in his own ambivalence between the positivity and the negativity, or source materials that have been brought together. I think this is actually the end of the Torah.
Can I make one little comment before Barry come and chime in here, which is, we always focus on Uvacharta v'chayim, choose life in this verse, but maybe we want to focus on Hayidoti b'chem hayom et hashamayim v'aretz. Let's testify by the heaven and earth. I mean, if that is not the perfect coda to Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz, I don't know what is, okay?
Totally.
God has created heaven and earth at the beginning of all time, and now we are testifying by that fact, right? We are holding the heaven and earth as witnesses, right? To the ultimate eternity of reality, that you Pitzkala Yid, you little Jew, all of us, you have a choice to make. Your choice is, you can choose life. Now, you spoke before about, the Platonic idea here, that you're not going to make choices that are detrimental to you, unless, of course, you do.
No, listen, this is big. I mean, some years ago, we like in the last few years in the United States, because of economic conditions and economic inequality and the plague of drug abuse and stuff, we've been talking about deaths of despair, suicides and alcoholism and stuff like that. And a few years ago, on Kol Nidre night, I talked about the rising suicide rate. This was before, I don't remember how many years ago it was, but certainly before COVID, and it was probably still in the Obama administration already. I don't remember, but I talked about, it seems like it ought to be easy to choose life and to love life, and it isn't always. And I think we in the rabbinate, certainly have known people who have struggled with suicidal ideation. And when I gave that Dvar Torah, the number of people who came to me and talked to me about suicide in their families was totally notable. So you do have characters like Yonah in the Maftir for Yom Kippur afternoon, and Rachel, who is portrayed like when she's in her childlessness and infertility, she's like, I want to die.
Moses himself.
Moses himself, I want to die. And you realize that, it ought to be obvious that people always want to live, but it's not obvious. And sometimes people really struggle with wanting to live.
Yeah.
So these verses come as a reminder that choosing life, choosing to do the right thing, is a process. It's not an event. It's not something that you finish doing. It's something that you start doing and continue to do. And that's why the important part, it seems to me, is that you love God and you listen to his voice and you cleave to him. In order to listen to his voice, you have to love God. If you hate God or you are distant from God, you're less likely to listen to his voice. And only if you listen to his voice can you actually cleave to God. And I think for some of us, we want to be able to cleave to God without listening to him. Look, there are a lot of ways to be Jewish, as we all know, and we stand for one particular version, the conservative view, and we don't think that other ways are necessarily inferior. It's just not the way that we ourselves have chosen. But it's important that for those who have chosen this way, that there is some kind of discipline involved and some kind of legal framework so that we can give voice to God's voice. We can listen to God and act upon the voice that we hear.
Ki hu chayecha v'orech yamecha. He is your life and the length of your days. It's a bold statement. It's a problematic statement. We wish it were only that so. I mean, we can't say that without the tragic nature of reality.
I think that part of it here is how we understand Orach Yamim, the length of your days. If we're equating it with long life, then indeed there is a tragic dimension to it. But if we're saying that God guides our life, whatever the length of our days is, then in that sense, and only that sense, perhaps it doesn't matter whether your time on this earth is short or long, God is still the guide.
Mm-hmm. That's really good because, I'm a little bit, like the phrase long life. Well, by definition, that's relative. I mean, it's relative to Homo sapiens and their biology. It's not long in terms of history. It's not long in, like, a sequoia tree that lived 80 years. It would be a young tree. It wouldn't be an old tree, right? But a human being who lived, 150 years would be like unimaginably old. So I really do think that long or short is just an entirely variable and relative thing. Think about the other idioms. Sva yamim, sated with days, satisfied with days, or babi yamim, you came in your old age. B'seva tova, in good white-hairedness, something like that. It's not always a long life. It's like sometimes our idioms for, relatively longer life, they're more about your emotional relationship to the length of your days, which I think emerges from what Barry said.
So it's occurring to me as we're reading these last verses here, if we're going to find this as one of the codas of the whole Torah, what do you make of Asher nishbadon alavotecha Avraham liYitzchak liYaakov? They get a little redux here. They get a little shout out here. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I find that it's quite lovely because the story of the people starts with those three. Yes, they are our fathers, and of course we include our mothers in the mix. But if it weren't for them, and it weren't for the covenant, and it weren't for their stories and their long life and their clinging to God, none of us would be here. And so maybe there's just we're giving a little. I think it's kavod. We're giving hakarat kavod to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
I think it goes even beyond that because our lives are supposed to be the fulfillment of their lives. Yeah. As human beings, their life on earth has a limit, as all of our lives on earth have a limit. But we want to live on, and we want our descendants to live with part of us in them. And so when we get to the end of the Parsha here with the reference to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and as you suggested, Elliot, including the matriarchs as well, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, it means that we are seeing them as our parents, our ancestors, and that their lives give meaning to our lives. And that's a great way for them to live on long after their deaths on this earth.
As our own parents give meaning to our lives, and as I think, hope we give meaning to our children's lives, I think this is part of the continuity of the eternity of Torah, the eternity of the Jewish people.
Think back to one small detail in the Jacob story, when Jacob comes to Pharaoh, like after all of the everything, the Joseph story, and he thinks he's dead, and he turns out to be alive, and he actually comes back, and now Joseph is the big man in Egypt. He meets Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says to him, "How old are you?" He says, "I'm really old. I'm 147." But he says, "Ma'at v'ra'im hayu yemei shnei chayai." My years are few and crappy. Okay, my life has stunk. It's been bad. It's been bad the whole time. And so at least at one moment it was like Jacob was really depressed. Okay, and me'at v'ra'im. It was like the life stinks and in such small portions. And and now I think it's exactly what you said, Elliot, that there's this affirmation of it might have been hard at certain times, but look where we are now.
You gotta love him for that. I mean, I'm inclined that you want it darker. We want it darker. Let it go. There's dark, but it's like dark chocolate. It's full flavor. Dark wine. It's full flavor. It gives your life would not be as meaningful only with joy.
So the line that you quote, Jeremy, is the source of the old Catskills joke of the two women and
Right.
on the park bench. One of them says the food here is terrible, and the other says yes in such small portions. But what is important to note about Jacob is that he goes on to live another 17 years.
Yeah.
And he does not think at the end of his life, even though he is accurate in that he does not reach the age of his grandfather or father, that his life has been bad. He is able to bestow blessing on his grandchildren. He's able to bless his children. And I think we could say, even though it doesn't say of Jacob as it did of Abraham, that he died at a ripe old age, that Jacob ultimately did have a fulfilling life. And so it's important that even when we have these dark moments, that we can hope that the darkness will lift, and that when it comes to meet our Maker, we will do so with a smile perhaps on our face.
It's such a lovely thought, and it connects in some way to the whole sense of the Haftarah, the culminating Haftarah of the seven cycle, the cycle of seven Haftarot after Tisha B'Av, which is just filled with elation and filled with the sense that you are not abandoned. Jerusalem, this city will never be abandoned. This is guarded and filled with glory, and it will be the place. It will be sought after, and so many themes like that in this Haftarah. It is a perfect way to end the cycle of comfort for the people of Israel, for Klal Yisrael, and a perfect way for us to conclude our edition of Parsha Talk this week, hoping that everyone enjoys their Shabbat, is ready for a beautiful Rosh Hashanah. We hope to be with you maybe again before Rosh Hashanah. And thank you all for watching, listening to us. We really, really enjoy having you and sharing Torah with you. And from all of us,
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.